This is BBC One in the East Midlands with the latest BBC News.
America wants the death penalty for the first Guantanamo suspects tried for 9/11.
The building has collapsed.
The building has collapsed.
Nearly 3,000 were killed that day, and America's foreign policy changed for a generation. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind behind the attacks, and 5 others now face a trial.
These charges allege a long-term, highly sophisticated, organized plan by al-Qaeda to attack the United States of America.
We'll be looking at why critics say the tribunals will not be fair. Also tonight, right message, wrong words. The Archbishop justifies his comments on Sharia law. One of the biggest ever art robberies, thieves in Switzerland make off with 80 millions of Impressionist paintings. And Mills versus McCartney, estranged in life, face to face in a court fight over Paul's millions.
Here in the East Midlands, he lost all his limbs to meningitis. Now a year on, a brighter future for Edward. And the flat full of syringes. A couple are evicted. It'll cost thousands to put right the damage.
Good evening. It was the deadliest strike on American soil. Today, 6 men have been charged with involvement in the September 11th attacks on New York and Washington. Prosecutors at the Pentagon will be asking for the death penalty. One of the men, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, is described as the mastermind behind the plot, planned as early as 1996. Nearly 3,000 people were killed that day, and as our North America editor Justin Webb reports, those events have shaped America's foreign policy ever since.
September the 11th, 2001 is etched on the consciousness of an American generation. It was a crime which caused death and injury on a massive scale, but also left mental scars on a nation that had felt safe and will never feel safe again. 9/11 led directly to wars, to retribution, and now, according to the White House, to justice.
Today, the convening authority for military commissions received sworn charges against 6 individuals alleged to be responsible for the planning and execution of the attacks upon the United States of America, which occurred on September the 11th, 2001. These attacks resulted in the death of 2,973 people, including 8 children.
6 men have been charged. The best known, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the alleged mastermind, and Ramzi bin al-Shibh, accused of being the link between al-Qaeda and the hijackers.
Each of the defendants is charged under the Military Commission Act with the crime of conspiracy and with the separate substantive offenses of murder in violation of the law of war, attacking civilians, attacking civilian objects, intentionally causing serious bodily injury, destruction of property in violation of the law of war, terrorism.
Osama bin Laden, the al-Qaeda leader, is not on the charge sheet. That is a bitter disappointment to many Americans who see him as the greatest target for justice or revenge. His name came up at the press conference, an interesting question and a frosty response.
So it's conceivable that one of these defendants could call Osama bin Laden as a witness.
I suppose. It's conceivable.
What happened here at the Pentagon and in New York changed America forever. No trial is going to alter that fact. But Americans are hungry for justice, and this at least is the beginning of that process.
184 people died in the Pentagon attack. There'll be grim satisfaction here that today's trial announcement was made in a room so close to where these scenes played out 7 years ago. The trials will be complex and imperfect. Americans know that, but hugely important as well. Justin Webb, BBC News, Washington.
So what will be the evidence against those on trial? Critics say the prosecutor's case is tainted by the use of so-called waterboarding during interrogations. Human rights organisations argue the technique is a form of torture. Our security correspondent Gordon Carrera reports.
This was the moment in 2002 when one of the men due to stand trial, Ramzi bin al-Shibh, was captured in Pakistan. he was immediately spirited away to a secret CIA prison. 6 months later, he was joined by this man, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. In time, he was to boast to his interrogators that he was behind 9/11.
The charges allege that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks by proposing the operational concept to Osama bin Laden as early as 1996, obtaining approval and funding from Osama bin Laden for the attacks, overseeing the entire operation, and training the hijackers in all aspects of the operation.
2 of the other men charged today are alleged to have trained to be hijackers, but were unable to take part. After more than 3 years of interrogation, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was transferred from the secret CIA prison to here, Guantanamo Bay, to stand trial. But it's his confession produced in CIA custody that could prove most controversial in his upcoming military tribunal. It came after he was subject to this process, known as waterboarding, where the detainee is made to feel as if drowning. The US denies this is torture. Others disagree and question whether, when the military tribunal opens, such evidence should be used. America's Homeland Security Secretary told the BBC today it was yet to be decided.
Any legal system evaluates the evidence that the prosecutor proposes to put in, determines whether to make it admissible or not, and no doubt they consider the circumstances under which the evidence was obtained. And then the judge makes a ruling about what's appropriate, and it'll be reviewed in due course.
America may soon witness the first trial of those alleged to be behind the country's worst terrorist attack. It will be a trial like no other, and for many watching, American justice will be under scrutiny. Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
Well, let's return to Justin Webb now in Washington. Justin, how significant is the timing of these charges?
Well, what the White House says is that there is absolutely no political significance at all. They say that the decision was made by the Pentagon and by the judicial authorities inside the Pentagon. It was communicated to the president. It was handed to him as a fact that this was going to happen last weekend, and he simply accepted it. But of course, I think it's fair to say that the Bush administration has been desperately keen for this to happen before the end of the Bush administration, partly because of a desire to see some kind of closure to this whole thing, or at least to get the trials underway. I think it's very unlikely they'll close down during the time the Bush administration is still in existence, but also for another reason, that is to justify Guantanamo and to suggest to the world that this business, that this prison camp, so much criticised by other people, has been ultimately, at least in one respect, a success. That's why they've been so keen to get it going so soon.
OK, Justin, thank you. Those waiting for an apology from the Archbishop of Canterbury over his remarks about Sharia law will be disappointed tonight. Speaking at the Church of England Synod, Dr. Rowan Williams made a robust defence of his right to discuss the role of Sharia law within the UK. The closest he got to saying sorry was taking responsibility for what he called an unclarity on the issue. Our home editor Mark Easton reports.
It had been billed as Judgment Day for the Archbishop. In fact, the vast majority had made up their mind before Dr. Williams had spoken a word. A standing ovation, with only a tiny minority pointedly seated and silent.
Please remain standing for prayer. To build up your body.
Such has been the anger whipped up after his controversial remarks on Sharia law. Dr. Williams had torn up his planned address. In its place, a recognition of clumsiness, but not the apology some had demanded.
I must, of course, take responsibility for any unclarity in either that text or in the radio interview, and for any misleading choice of words that's helped to cause distress or misunderstanding.
After the almost biblical storm of criticism that's rained down upon him, the spiritual guide to 80 million Anglicans sought to calm, to heal, and to explain, but not to repent.
I believe quite strongly that it is not inappropriate for a pastor of the Church of England to address issues around the perceived concerns of other religious communities, and to try and bring them into better public focus.
I was misunderstood was his message, but when the audience gave its verdict once again, a few could not bring themselves to clap.
since a number of us did not agree with what he'd said and feel that it requires much more careful thinking and debate before it can be assumed that the Church is fully supportive of him on this very contentious matter, that it was important to indicate that there were some of us who had deep reservations.
Those lawmakers hoping for clarity on exactly what the Archbishop means by an accommodation for Sharia were likely to be disappointed. Did he think religious courts should operate as an alternative to traditional courts of justice, or beneath them? The Prime Minister made his view clear today. Religious law, explained his spokesman, should be subservient to British criminal and civil law. The Archbishop has spoken of overlapping jurisdictions where individuals might choose to seek justice under one system or another. Last week he spoke of how it was very unsatisfactory that a citizen should live simply under the rule of the sovereign state. Today he said he was only talking about additional choices under the law of the United Kingdom. Dr. Williams appeared to blame electronic global communication for its toxic effect on other ways of communicating. His admitted clumsiness with the 24-hour news media has left him wounded but not repentant. Mark Easton, BBC News, Central London.
3 teenagers have been jailed for life for the murder of Gary Newlove, who was kicked to death outside his home in Warrington in August. Mr. Newlove challenged the youth as they tried to vandalise his wife's car. The judge described Gary Newlove as a devoted family man who had not provoked the gang in any way. It's been described as one of the biggest art heists in history. 4 paintings worth more than £80 million stolen by an armed gang from a museum in Zurich. The pictures by the impressionists Cézanne, Degas, Van Gogh and Monet were seized in broad daylight. From Zurich, Christian Fraser reports.
It was an audacious, spectacular robbery that's left Swiss detectives guessing. On Sunday evening, inside this unremarkable-looking building, 3 men walked through the main doors of the Émile Brûlé Museum, armed with a pistol.
One of the men threatened the staff member at the entrance with a gun and forced him to lie on the ground with his head down.
These are the 4 paintings they took. Claude Monet's Poppy Field at Vétheuil, Vincent van Gogh's Blooming Chestnut Branches, Paul Cézanne's Boy in the Red Waistcoat, and a portrait of Ludovic Lepich and his daughter by Edgar Degas. Together, their estimated value is at least £80 million. Within several minutes, the 3 masked men were running out through these doors with these valuable paintings tucked under their arms. They came out through these gates onto this quiet, leafy lane to a getaway vehicle, a white transit van that was parked here waiting for them. They left in such a hurry, said police, that it's possible the paintings were hanging out of the back. The curators said the paintings were behind glass, but other more valuable paintings were left behind.
The thieves will pass the pictures down a line of people probably who don't know each other until in 10 years' time number 5 will innocently phone Interpol or Scotland Yard and say, I think I might have information leading to the recovery of the Biola pictures. And then a reward will be paid, probably for these, at least £20 to £50 million.
It's a sharp reminder that art crime is still one of the world's most profitable, illicit businesses, now worth an estimated £3 billion a year. Christian Fraser, BBC News, Zurich.
And coming up on tonight's programme. Under attack while saving lives, the firefighters who say they need more protection. Sir Paul McCartney and Heather Mills were face-to-face in the High Court today as they tried to reach a financial settlement to their bitter divorce. Sir Paul's fortune is thought to be more than £800 million, and the divorce settlement could be one of the country's biggest. Well, Louisa Baldini is here with the story. Louisa.
George, nearly 2 years since they split up, Heather Mills and Sir Paul McCartney met again today in the divorce courts. At stake, the former Beatles' estimated £825 million fortune. The big question is, just how much will his former wife get? Sir Paul left his North London home this morning, opening the gates once again to a flurry of media attention. The former Beatle could be facing the biggest payout in legal history. He arrived at the High Court just a few minutes after his estranged wife, the former model and anti-landmine campaigner Heather Mills. It was a very different picture in 2001 when the couple announced their engagement, but after just 4 years of marriage they separated. They said it was amicable, but incidents like this when Lady Mills was locked out of the marital home made it clear that the split had turned sour. Heather Mills' appearances on TV last year showed the pressure was getting to her.
I've had worse press than a paedophile or a murderer.
But the outbursts led to her and her lawyers parting company, meaning she's now representing herself. No mean feat, given that she will be up against experienced divorce lawyer Fiona Shackleton, who represented Prince Charles in his divorce from Princess Diana. So how will Heather Mills fare?
In terms of the niceties of the legal argument she wants to put across, she's going to be a little bit at sea, as any lay person would. And this isn't going to be an opportunity in which sort of soapbox, grandstanding, very impassioned pleas are really going to cut a lot of ice.
Cases like that of Melissa Miller here on the left set a precedent. She won £5 million after a union of less than 3 years. But experts say no other case can compare to the McCartneys.
Paul McCartney accumulated most of his assets before the marriage. That will set a precedent as well. And we will look at that very carefully. What is she entitled to receive by way of compensation?
There was no sign of a settlement when the McCartneys left court this afternoon. Both parties are expected to return tomorrow. Well, even at the end, we may never know how much the settlement's worth because everything's happening behind closed doors. Only if it goes to appeal will we hear the detail. George.
Louisa, thank you. Firefighters in England and Wales say they're being attacked in the very communities they set out to help. There's been a 15% increase in assaults on fire crews and they want greater protection. The Fire Brigades Union say such attacks have become a recreational activity, with crews being ambushed, shot at, stabbed and abused. Danny Savage has the story.
In some parts of Britain, this happens so frequently it's no longer reported to police. Firefighters being attacked by the very people they're trying to protect.
As I got off, brick came and landed basically on that part of my helmet there and took a massive chunk out of it.
The most recent attack on this long-serving fireman didn't just target his crew.
As that was happening, a member of the public came out to move the kids on basically, but unfortunately because of his efforts he got badly beaten by the gang of youths that was there. Obviously we felt we had to get off and help him, so we managed to get off the engine, and whilst we were doing that the hail of bricks and stones continued.
So because of all these problems, these tenders don't just carry life-saving equipment, they have cameras all over them. This one here looks out the back. There are others on the side of the vehicle so that they have a full 360-degree view. On top of that, everything on here can be centrally locked so people can't steal anything. And all the windows on the cab, well, they're reinforced because in the past, bricks have come through the windows and injured firefighters. And in the cab of a modern fire engine, there's even more security equipment, such as these cameras, which look forward. And also in some other brigades, crews have been issued with spit kits, so that the DNA of anybody who abuses or spits at a firefighter can be gathered. The government says the number of attacks is going down, but figures obtained by the Fire Brigades Union from the fire authorities show an average of 40 attacks on crews every week in Britain last year. In England and Wales, there were 1,500 attacks, up 15% on the year before. So in some brigades, like here in Manchester, they've introduced courses to train frontline staff how to deal with troublemakers, who range from the curious to the violent.
We had a defining moment in about 2005 where 3 of our firefighters came under a very severe attack, a very sustained attack. And it really worried us. We thought if something's not changed significantly, then there's likely to be significant injuries or in fact firefighters being killed.
Brigades are also running schemes to persuade youths that this is not what to do when a fire engine turns up. But the Fire Brigades Union says more needs to be done to protect its members. Danny Savage, BBC News, Hull.
In South Korea, an enormous fire has destroyed the country's oldest and most valued cultural treasure. The 600-year-old wooden gate, which once formed part of a wall around the city of Seoul, went up in flames late last night. Hundreds of firefighters fought to douse the flames, but the building collapsed. Police have tonight arrested a 70-year-old man on suspicion of arson. A state of emergency is in force in East Timor after the president, José Ramos Horta, was shot and wounded in an assassination attempt. Mr. Ramos Horta has been flown to hospital in northern Australia, where his condition is said to be serious but stable. Iran's President Ahmadinejad has been celebrating his country's Revolution Day with a defiant message to the world that he won't be slowing down his nuclear program. It's not the only area where he's facing criticism from the international community. Human rights organisations have accused him of dramatically increasing the number of executions this year. Public hangings have been halted in the last few days, but death sentences remain commonplace. Our correspondent John Line reports from Tehran. You may find images from the beginning of this report disturbing.
It's early in the morning and the crane that's to be used as a mobile gallows is being manoeuvred into the centre of Tehran. Already the crowd are out in force, some of them in a remarkably cheery mood. A few are getting ready to photograph the scene on their mobile phones. But then the hangmen begin their work. This is footage of an execution last September. There's been a big increase in the number of executions since President Ahmadinejad took power, particularly this year, though the chief judge has now called for a halt to holding them in public. After a Quranic recitation, the two convicts are led out while the sentence is read. They've been convicted of numerous bank robberies and murders. They don't look very remorseful. In fact, despite what's about to happen to them, one of the two men can't seem to stop smiling. We've chosen not to show the moment they were hanged, under a poster of the judge they were convicted of murdering. Political and religious leaders say this sort of punishment is necessary to deter these sort of hardened criminals.
In Islam, punishment is very harsh because the philosophy of punishment is to prevent the people to commit a crime.
But a leading human rights campaigner in Iran says there's a political message as well.
I see this as a way of putting fear into society. They want to use this to frighten people, to make people afraid of voicing criticism.
This is where a man was stoned to death for adultery in Iran last year. You can still see the blood on the stones. Under Iranian law, they mustn't be too small or too big in case the criminal dies too quickly. At today's rally to mark the anniversary of the Islamic Revolution, some of the hardliners think Islamic law is still not practiced rigorously enough here.
President Ahmadinejad is trying to revive the Islamic Revolution by a return to what he sees as the basic values of Islam. That means Iran turning to a strict, sometimes a harsh interpretation of Sharia law. And if that means a confrontation with Western liberalism, so be it. The crowds here are not complaining. John Line, BBC News, Freedom Square in Tehran.
Football now, and Arsenal have opened up a 5-point lead in the Premier League with a 2-0 win over Blackburn. It was a close-fought game with Arsenal defending an early lead, but in the final minute an Arsenal break set up striker Emmanuel Adebayo to finish off the game. With the other challengers dropping points over the weekend, the Gunners now move clear at the top of the table. Is the internet killing the radio star? Britain's largest commercial radio company, GCAP, is to close 2 of its digital radio stations. Once labelled the future of radio, the company now says digital is not an economically viable platform. Here's our business correspondent, Hugh Pym.
A crackling portable radio as millions have known it down the generations.
The World at One. This is Martha Carney.
And this is digital audio broadcasting, DAB radio. For some time it's been touted as the future for radio listening. But even as it's taking root, is DAB radio in danger of being overtaken by radio on the internet, on a laptop or a mobile, for example? That was the intriguing question which was being posed today. It follows the closure by Britain's biggest commercial radio company, GCAP Media, of 2 digital stations, The Jazz and Planet Rock. It said DAB was not an economically viable platform. So how popular is digital radio? If you look at sales, 6.5 million DAB sets have now been purchased. But in terms of share of the radio market, AM and FM services still have 74%. DAB has 10%. The internet now has 2%, with other sources including radio on digital TV, 14%.
There will be more digital radios, more people will buy them and more people will adopt the technology. But millions will not adopt the technology because they can get everything they need from their existing analogue radio or from their computer or from their television set.
This Christmas, give something that might actually be loved.
The BBC, which has 5 DAB channels, has thrown its weight behind promoting digital radio and the sets. And its head of audio took to the airwaves to say why it was a better bet than the online offering.
One of the great things about radio is its portability, the way people listen to it in the bathroom and in the garden, everywhere. And one of the things that DAB does is it gives you the ability to take it with you anywhere.
But you can take a laptop anywhere, and that's the challenge for radio providers as they try to predict the listening habits of the future. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Well, there's more news over on News 24, but now we can join our news teams where you are. Good night.
Good evening. Exactly a year to the day after he fell ill, the family of a boy who lost all his limbs to meningitis have been celebrating his survival. Edward Bright and his family enjoyed a day at Derbyshire's Tramway Village. The staff there have raised over £1,000 for the charity that's been set up to support Edward. Here's James Roberson.
At Christ Tramway Village this morning, the Bright family were enjoying a day out, but they were also enjoying just having Edward with them. A year ago, Edward's life hung by a thread, ravaged by meningococcal septicemia. Edward survived the often killer disease, but lost all his limbs in the process. Since then, however, he's made remarkable progress, and today was as enthusiastic as any other lad about his day out on the trams.
I think he quite enjoyed it. He enjoyed sitting in the driver's seat, but he wanted to go upstairs. But yes, he liked it. He liked the view, but I don't think it was quite fast enough for him.
Took each day as it comes, and I mean, yes, if we'd have had to sat and thought about it, we wouldn't have thought that Edward had got to the position that he's in now.
Staff at the Tramway Village, who raised over £1,000 for the Edward Bright appeal, were amazed at people's generosity.
I went across and apparently it was a foreign gentleman who just dropped a £50 note straight in. So that was a real good boost for the Edward collection.
The family say Edward's overcome his disabilities to an extraordinary degree, and they're keen that he continues to grow confident and independent. James Roberson, East Midlands Today, Derbyshire.
A judge has dismissed a manslaughter charge against a woman who got into a row with a pensioner over a parking space. The judge said there was insufficient evidence that Zoe Forbes had played a role in the death of 79-year-old Bernard Gilbert. He died from a heart attack after a brick was thrown through the window of his home in Derby. Zoe Forbes' husband Mark and his stepbrother Stephen are still on trial for manslaughter. Now, it's been dubbed the House of Horrors, and it's easy to see why. When housing officers evicted a couple for rent arrears, they discovered a drugs den which left them appalled. The cost of repairing damage to the flat and making it fit to live in will run into thousands of pounds. Tonight, officials have warned other tenants that such behaviour will not be tolerated. Quentin Rayner reports.
Comes part and parcel of your daily jobs, I expect now, does it?
Yeah, you get used to it after a bit.
Kathleen Moore was the housing officer who discovered the detritus. The one-bedroom flat in Mansfield was littered with hundreds of needles and syringes scattered amongst soiled clothing and discarded meals. Blood is splattered on a number of walls and doors.
It was disgusting, absolutely disgusting. We just couldn't come in at first, we've just had to leave it, and it's been left like this a week now. You know, it's not very good at all.
How does it compare with what you've seen in the past, other flats?
Oh, I've seen a lot, but this is quite bad. And, you know, people having to live like this, and the neighbours as well. It's just not fair on other people that live in their block of flats like this.
The games the couple liked to play could also describe the state in which they lived. Laura White and her partner hadn't paid rent for a year, running up arrears of more than £1,600, despite repeated requests for payment. Her partner, Lee Close, jumped through a first-floor window to escape when the front door was kicked in to evict them.
This is just a waste of resources, really. We don't exactly know how much it's going to cost, but the clean-up itself today is sort of £500. £500 for a new door, and approximately £4,000 to £5,000, I would imagine, to actually make the property livable again.
The Ravensdale estate is nicknamed Beirut, and with some justification according to locals.
I've lived round here for the last 40-odd years, and I've seen it go from bad to worse, with drugs, rubbish, and everything you can talk about.
Laura White and Lee Close will now be banned for life from renting again in the district. Quentin Rayner, East Midlands Today, Mansfield.
Meanwhile, parents of problem children have been warned they face eviction by the local council. It follows the case of a 17-year-old who's been banned from part of Nottingham for 3 years. Jack Watson from Seaton Crescent in Aspley will also be detained for 16 months after magistrates heard how he'd been part of a gang that attacked homes and businesses in the area. Nottingham City Homes says it plans to evict families who don't control their children. A £20 million community centre in Leicester has been saved from closure. The People Centre in Belgrave had been facing financial problems, but now a Leicester-based housing association has secured its funding. As part of the deal, services will be expanded so the centre can then fund itself. Light pollution in Derby is having an unexpected impact on a pair of peregrine falcons living in the cathedral. New evidence has shown just how well the birds have adapted to their urban surroundings. Remains of their prey have shown the birds are probably hunting at night. Pudding Cam, a new camera being fitted to the outside of the cathedral, could provide the first photographic evidence.
Well, I'm hoping that we might see maybe the birds ranging out at night, flying off, and perhaps coming back straight away with a bird that they've caught.
Now with the weather, here's Sarah.
Well, after a lovely day today when it almost felt like spring had finally sprung, we are turning very cold overnight now. We will not only see a widespread frost, we're also going to see quite a lot of fog developing throughout the East Midlands and obviously forming as freezing fog by the early hours of the morning. So temperatures tonight dropping to a minimum of -3 Celsius. Now tomorrow the fog around first thing, so causing quite a few problems during the rush hour period. It will gradually start to clear though by the afternoon. We've got another lovely afternoon tomorrow, feeling a bit milder than today.
Now make sure you watch tomorrow's East Midlands Today when we find out why more people in the region are installing their own personal CCTV systems. And that's all from the Lake Team. Bye for now.
Hello, good evening. Well, I'm sure for many of you that was another very acceptable day's weather, but we have to pay the penalty with the clear skies producing a fair bit of mist and fog overnight and some chilly nights as well. But it will lead into another very sunny day indeed for many of us once the day gets going. The big picture shows that the Atlantic fronts are way out in the Atlantic. Clear skies, as I say, for many parts of the British Isles, and hence the widespread frost that is already developing and will do so through the rest of the night. In addition, we have the problem with fog. You see it there developing in a number of locations across the British Isles on what is going to be a chilly old night. Some areas, certainly across the south of England, parts of South Wales, escaping the worst of the frost, but further north into the Midlands, the north of England and to Scotland, it will be a chilly old night and a foggy start yet again. Perhaps the M80, the M8 and the M90 all suffering from fog just as bad as it was today. And certainly as we come down into the Vale of York through the East Midlands into parts of East Anglia, here again some of the visibility is just as poor as anything that you experienced through the course of this morning, so please bear that in mind. Along the south coast, not such a problem, I suspect, free of frost and fog for the most part. Just a little bit of breeze here perhaps across the southwest of England and South Wales, keeping the fog at bay. Not so perhaps through the marches, and this is a bit of a change as well for Northern Ireland. Didn't see much in the way of fog this morning. You may well do through the course of Tuesday morning. So as the day gets going, so the frost will dissipate. The fog may well linger, as it did this morning, until around about 11 o'clock, midday or so in one or two spots. But certainly up around the southeastern corner of Scotland, it should be a much, much better day than you had today. Won't be difficult, will it? And as the sun pours on through, 15 degrees could well be yours down in the London area. On the north coast of Wales, it could be as high as 17 degrees. Now, I should say, make the most of it. Things will change. The air is much colder over the continent from Tuesday into Wednesday, so some of the cloud and the cold air will just begin to creep out of the continent across the North Sea and filter its way in towards the eastern side of the British Isles. No doubt about it, another foggy start to the day, but that fog will dissipate. But despite the sunshine out towards the west, you will see that there is a change on the way out towards the east, the first signs of that cloud, which will become a good deal more widespread through Thursday, and you can forget all about 15, 16 and 17, and it's hello, 5, 6 and 7 degrees. A real change there and an absence of sunshine for many. So the watchword is make the most of the sunshine on Tuesday. It is sure not to last. More details on the web from me. Good night.
Another tense
FA Cup 5th round with Manchester United versus Arsenal.
Picked his spot perfectly.
Bristol Rovers versus Southampton. And Sheffield United versus Middlesbrough. Live this weekend on BBC One and Radio 5 Live.
Radio for thinking about film, music, books, media, the arts. Radio for Front Row, Monday to Friday, 7:15 p.m. Radio for curious minds. Nick Nolte is a veteran cop suspected of murder. Timothy Hutton is a young district attorney on his case. Crime thriller Q&A in 45 minutes. First on BBC One and BBC HD. A woman scorned.